So we best crack on. For those who were unable to join the first session in the morning, I'll just give a really brief introduction. Welcome to the second session on the panel on cities, urbanization, and the politics of urban infrastructure systems. On behalf of the co-organizers, Dr. Friend from the Department of Environment and Geography at University of York, Dr. Jonathan Enther, also at York in the Stockholm Environment Institute, and myself from York as well. Welcome to the second session. In terms of the format, obviously we have a kind of asynchronic format. So we thought we'll start by having each of the panelists present in 1 or 2 minutes, or sorry, 2 to 3 minutes, very short anyway, what their paper is about, followed by some Q&A. As part of maybe your comments, if you could also reflect perhaps on the question of political space and the role of knowledge in relation to your paper, that would be excellent, just to kind of drive home some themes that we've been thinking about in regards to the session. So in terms of the first paper, I think that's you, right, Anusha? Yeah. So Anusha will be presenting on knowledge infrastructure's approach to water governance, a case of Dhulikhel municipality in the urbanizing mid-hills of Nepal. So Anusha, the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you, Bobby. Thank you, everyone, for your presence here. This is a project. This is this presentation that I'm discussing today is part of PolCap's project, Transforming Political Capabilities for Equitable Resilience. And where in this this particular case, I'm discussing a case of Kabri Manjang, which is a part of Dhulikhel municipality close to the capital city of Kathmandu. In this case, it is largely related to the overall SDG goal, where there is a direction towards water for all, universal access to water. In that direction, the municipal government is also developing one house, one tap policy. It is implementing that, where it has been developing both deep borewell fed system, but also a spring fed system. But its primary preference is for the deep borewell fed system, whereas in the local community preference is largely for the spring-fed system. And this is where we are looking into what are the major discourses associated with these two systems and what knowledge bases they are putting forward in making their claims that which is the better solution for their particular area. If we see into the community perspectives, it is largely based on their experiences, that their observations of decades-long of dealing with the water issues, managing their local sources, and looking getting connections with different governmental and non-governmental organizations, and managing, developing, initiating, and maintaining their systems. Whereas if we see from the municipal perspectives, which argues that a spring-fed system would not be a good solution for this hilly area. And whereas in this case, we see that they argue that a deep borewell fed system is a proven area, a solution for such areas, which is claims that it is a water scarce area. So this is particularly also in relation to the potential demand, as it is also an urbanizing area. So in this contrast, there is an isolation of these two levels of knowledge, the community level knowledge and the municipal level, as largely in silos rather than communicating with each other. And this is where we are trying to understand of two different discourses, the knowledge that plays role, and how the alliances, what alliances can there be potential to break these silos and bring this into the concerted decision-making processes. This is largely where we are using knowledge infrastructures approach to influence the urban water supply system. Thanks, Bobby.
Thanks, Anusha. That's great. Thank you for keeping that short and sweet and very concise and clear. Can I invite some of the other panelists, our colleagues, to put forth any questions for Anusha? Anything you would like to add, perhaps in the comment section or by video? If there's no immediate questions that spring immediately to mind, I'm sure I could ask something of you, Anusha, as we've been talking about Dhulikhel for a while now. I wonder, my question is about, I guess, methodology. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about what you're talking about here, about collaborative documentation of the spring-fed system. What are some of the perhaps
Yeah,
challenges you faced in undertaking that process.
yes, thanks, Bobby. This methodologically, we have been closely working with municipalities since and the local community since 2021, particularly in relation to these two systems. And we undertook a number of FGDs, series of FGDs at different settlements, and where we were focusing on their local water systems, what the sources they're using. So based on this, we found that they are, from when we started the interactions with the community, we were first impression for us also was that it was a water scarce community. But as we started going into the community discussing, gradually it started coming up that there are sources. Availability of water as such is not the problem. Then we started working with the community to reach their water sources, to as to document interacting with the community around the sources, also those who are depending on those sources, so as to document their observation and their experiences of changes in the spring flow, the uses, the claims over the, as we have been discussing, there are also prior rights related claims in some of the sources. So we are documenting this, the status of uses of water sources, but also their observed changes in the water sources, and also in the relation to their willingness to give it for the integration for the supply to the larger community. And the reluctance to those. So these are the particular focuses when in relation to what we are calling our hydrosocial report, what we're trying to produce. And we hope that this might also help to interact with the municipality, because at current level, the major challenge that communities and also we are facing is to bring this forward, that spring sources do have potential, or at least it needs to be, its potential needs to be explored better.
Thanks, Anisha. That's excellent. Any other kind of questions that people might have for Anisha? If not, oh, Richard, did you want to jump in? No, okay. I just saw the lead for it. Okay, well, if there's no additional questions, and if any comes up, just please throw them in the chat. We can probably move on then, for the interest of time. Next up is Pongtip, speaking about transforming knowledge infrastructure, the case of air pollution in China. Pongtip, if you could kind of outline the paper in 2 to 3 minutes, so then we can have some Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, great. This project is also part of the political capability program, together with University of York and also Chiang Mai University. This paper was based on a critical analysis of a civil society movement that generate evidence of air quality and building public dialogues together between academic, civil societies, and also the government, to put pressure into the government to take account into their actions and shifting government policies. It has been drawing on detail of case studies of governance change in air quality in the city of Chiang Mai, which is located in the north of Thailand. And we applied the concepts of knowledge infrastructures and political capabilities to analyze the way in which local actors engage in political controversies, and how evidence and knowledge and arguments can create significant shift in policy, even in the context of political pressure of civil society, with air quality increasingly emerging as a challenge of urban governance across the world. Chiang Mai represents a case study of global significance that provides theoretical and analytical lens to assess and shape the governance challenge of urban environmental quality and human well-being. So the process took from 2017 to about 2020. So that's what I have presented in my paper. So it has proved that with the right knowledge, and they can negotiate with the local government and have a policy change. Was that 2 minutes?
That was perfect, Pongtip. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Pongtip? Comments?
Maybe just flag something, because I think this. Oh, sorry, Dr. Num, you go.
Please go ahead, Richard. Okay, I'll just have a quick comment more about reflection. I think when hearing Pongtip's work and previously work from Chuvan, I think that's a kind of interesting comparison in terms of the roles of technology and and access to data and informations, and how citizens can bring such data to negotiate with the government. That's my quick comment on that. Thanks, Richard. Your turn.
We're like a double act. I was going to say something similar. I think there's something interesting going on in these, and from the first session as well, just the different technologies as well as the processes of participation, how different knowledges, different technologies that generate evidence can create new political spaces. I think there's something that seems to be coming up as well that struck me in the first session, is that perhaps traditionally in urban development, we've talked a lot about service delivery. I think we're also, when we're talking about infrastructure, we're looking at different levels of complexity and different scales. So it's not just the end service, it's not just the water, but it's the whole infrastructure, technological, institutional structures and processes that source that water and then deliver and distribute it.
That's a really interesting point, and I just had me thinking perhaps that the case, Pongtip, or my initial thought was the case is such an interesting one of co-production, right? Of processes in which technology and social order kind of mutually reinforce and shape each other. And I was kind of struck by Richard's point about how different technologies, different devices might shape, political space in different ways. And I would just add to that, it might also be worth considering the way in which that co-production process shapes publics. So different types of publics with different capacities, different types of perhaps identities, subjectivities, social histories are connected perhaps to different devices or to the mobilization of different forms of data.
Yeah, this is very true, because the knowledge of air quality also comes from the low cost and also the network and being able to access it on your mobile phone. That give a rise of awareness to people, especially when the arrival of air visual, when globally you can compare with global data as well, saying that how come Chiang Mai has reached the top world worst air quality in the world. So that has give people a lot of realization that this is really bad.
I remember I was in Chiang Mai, right, during that period where there was the kind of the quality of air crisis, where kind of across society there seems to be a kind of a shift. There was the emergency was declared, the university was closed, and it corresponded to like people using kind of ICTs and what air visual. And it just became increasingly prominent, didn't it, during that period of time? It was very interesting to see in your paper, or in your presentation, you had a slide that kind of traced the kind of history chronologically of kind of monitoring in Thailand. I thought that was really fascinating and really excellent. Anyone, any other comments or questions for Pongtip? I have a couple more questions, but I don't want to monopolize the Q&A. If there aren't any other questions, we do have a bit more time for your paper, Pongtip. So I was wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit more about the Breath Council, or the background around the Breath. It seems to be kind of key to the story, right, that you're telling.
Yeah, the Breath Council is very interesting in a way that it started off with a group of NGOs that previously the way they do their work is they are protesting against something, or finger pointing at some people that this is your fault, you have to do something about it. That is your fault, you have to do something about it. But the way that the Breath Council is formed is very different. It's more collaborative. The way they work together is that we cannot just finger pointing at each other anymore, because the source of haze is not only burning of agricultural resources or burning of forest fire, but it's multiple sources, and there are a lot of people involved in the process. So if you're finger pointing at one person, it actually traces back to another 100 or another 10 people. So we cannot do that. So the way the Breath Council is trying to work together is that let's do this together and let's find out. And they are divided into different working groups, like the rural development, the air quality, the social media people, and also the academic group. So they divided into different groups, and in that sense, they are trying to work out and telling the government that let us help you. We are not blaming you for not being able to control the air quality, but let us work with you and help you, assist you in the process, because we have the network and we have the people. So that's the way that they are able to negotiate with the governor that, okay, let us be on your committee and be on your side and help you, rather than standing on the opposite side and then finger pointing at each other. So that's how the Breath Council is formed. And through that process, the Breath Council was able to gather a lot of people, informing them about their health impact, but also do a lot of fact findings about where the source of haze and how we should control different part of the different parts of burnings. So that's about the Breath Council.
That's really interesting, Phongthip. Noom, if it's okay, can we hold your question to the end, perhaps, when we have enough time, so long as everyone can have enough time for that as well. Is that okay, Noom?
Sure, Bobby.
Okay, excellent. Okay, thank you very much, Phongthip. Next up is Enrique Pelez, who will be talking about political support as an enabler and a constraint, the case of aerial gondolas in La Paz, Bolivia. Welcome, Enrique. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So yeah, I conducted research on aerial gondolas in La Paz, which is the largest trunk system using aerial gondolas in the world, largest and highest. But yeah, and it was part of my master's thesis. But and the master's thesis was more of a political economy analysis and spatial analysis of the implementation process of the system. But in narrowing down in this paper, I wanted to talk about politics, and perhaps it's a little bit different from our colleagues' perspectives here, which are more bottom up. And this particular project was extremely top down, and my main let me explain why it was top down. It was top down because it was mainly as a reaction. The implementation of this system was mainly a reaction, a political reaction from the president's party and the president's political incentives to the opposition party, which was governing the city of La Paz, who had just implemented a bus system. So we would say the trigger of this policy that comes after 30 years of inaction is it's politically based, and the implementation was only possible, I argue in my paper, because of full political support from the president's office. But at the same time, I do also argue that this high level political support came at the cost of limited, almost zero community participation. Community participation was seen as a liability, as something that would make the project fall behind schedule. And it also came at some costs related to urban planning best practices that could have been implemented, or even financing. For example, this was fully financed by the central bank of Bolivia, and it was only in the last line, which was recently built, that they sought financing from multilateral development banks with better conditions. So basically, what I try to argue is that, and it's from a different perspective, is from more of a high level political, like how to navigate high level politics. And I argue that we need to be able, we need in terms of people willing to have a better infrastructure service, as we were talking before. We also need to, in some cases, we also need to navigate high-level politics besides community-based politics and organization. And yeah, and in my paper I put forward some recommendations and suggestions as to how to do that. But yeah, so basically that's what I talk about.
Hi, Enrique. Thank you very much for keeping that clear and concise and to time. Are there some questions from our colleagues for Enrique about his presentation? Oh, there is. Harriet here. Can you, and Richard, would you like to ask your questions?
Can I?
Yes,
Hello?
please. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, perfect. And thank you, Enrique, for your wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you can understand it clearly because I'm speaking a bit with a French accent. Anyway, my question is, I'm wondering if there could be a value, like a merit, to move from the political, like looking at the political process to the governance in itself. Because then my question would be, in that case, are there fragmentations? Are there any level or some kind of fragmentation in the form of governance in this particular case? Because it appears to me like as if, like, you know, the politics, it's just like one entity, but when in reality, like, it is reflected through governance, and governance often, like in most developing countries, it doesn't take just one form of governance. You know, we have the form, maybe it's a bit related to my own topic, like the formal and the informal governance. When we have like like people in the middle, you know, all of these different forms or even process of governing. I don't know if it could make sense, or if it makes sense in your case, in your own research. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. In the case of La Paz and Bolivia in general, Bolivia is in that time and in the last couple of years, it's been a pretty concentrated political power. So, and it's kind of it's a small country, so the president's office was able to concentrate a lot of resources and time in this particular issue because it was seen as a flagship policy, as also as a paradigm change in the sense of like the politics serving people, and as I said, breaking the trajectory of 30 years of poor or urban mobility solutions that weren't implemented or weren't able to succeed, and all that. But and yeah, of course, there is this case. I wouldn't argue that this is like something that it's applicable to every single country, because it's pretty unique in the sense that it was the president of the republic deciding to implement a particular policy and pushing it forward. And also, I would say it's a very centralized country. It's not a federal country. Well, it is more as a federal, but it's a very centralized country, and the municipality didn't have much power. So the municipality was elected by the people, but it didn't have much power, and there's there's no governor in the middle. There is a governor, but it has basically no power. And there are several different like governance like organizations, like unions, neighbor groups, community organizations, and all those came into like conflict in the implementation of this. But the power of the presidency was so overwhelmed compared to the overwhelming, was so overwhelming in comparison to the power and resources that these other groups had, that it was basically like not even a fight, not even a political fight. It was just the decision of moving forward, because the president's office also had the ability to work with the Supreme Court when it reached the Supreme Court, and to work with other like other resources. They had many other resources to solve different problems that appeared at different levels of governance. So I don't know if I'm exactly answering your question, but I try to give you like a brief perspective of what was the governance situation in La Paz in those years.
Yes, that's great. That's great. Thank you very much.
Richard, did you have a question?
I think I'll wait till we've heard from our other friends.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Enrique? Okay. If not, I have a question, but perhaps I'll save it to the end if we have time. Okay. Thank you, Enrique, very much for your presentation. you for your responding to the questions. I'd like to invite Henrietta Mesa to present next on the invisible infrastructures of Kinshasa's urban informal economy. Please, welcome.
Thank you very much, and I'm really happy to have to present here in this conference. So as the title says, like my presentation is about the urban infrastructure at the same time, like seen as institutional structure, but also as people, not just as material infrastructure, but as overall infrastructure, which can be somehow enabling for informal economic actors, and it can also be constraining. So I'm looking at Kinshasa, and Kinshasa is the capital city of DRC. So there has been like an exponential growth of people in the past few decades. And then now we are about 17 million of people. So much of the economy of Kinshasa is what is labeled, like quote unquote, the informal economy. Although I'm not going to engage now in the discussion whether it is informal or whether it's formal. But the point is that there are an heterogeneity of economic activities in Kinshasa, and that sectors attract people from very different ranks of lives and from very different backgrounds. There is so an heterogeneity of economic activities, but also some kind of heterogeneity of people, of economic actors themselves. And to be able to succeed in that economy, in the Kinshasa urban economy, I guess it can be the case in many other developing countries or even in developed countries, there is an important position or an important place that is given to the space, where space, economic space, physical space become like a form of capital. So the idea a bit like from drawing a bit from Bourdieu, where space, the physical space become also a kind of capital. And that space in Kinshasa, it's not everyone has equal access to the space, the physical space. And then it becomes like, to be able to access to a space, people have to negotiate, where there is the negotiation process in accessing the space. But as if you were able to read in the slide that I provided, that access, even that negotiation access to the physical or to the economic space, it becomes also one way that is highlighting like prevailing inequality in the city, where people draw from various social positions, people who are much better off, who can draw from much more important like social capital. They are able to negotiate from a very different, even more advantageous position than people who do not have that kind of volume of capital. So in conclusion, access to the space, even negotiation or contestation in accessing the city space or the economic space, it becomes one way for us of viewing the inequality. So that's what I'm presenting here as some kind of structure which becomes a bit visible, or although at first sight it will not appear visible, but it is actually. It is one of the structure that is constraining. It can be enabling to some actors, but it's mainly constraining to actors from a different, even from a lower social position perspective. That's my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Henrietta. Can we invite some questions from the floor, I guess, regarding the question? Yeah, Enrique, please.
Thank you for your presentation. I would like to ask you to tell us a little bit more about the role of city officials, but perhaps not like the city officials sitting in their like offices in the city hall or yeah, the city government, but that those semi-informal liaison people who tend to work first, if they exist. Is there some kind of informal network that city officials and politicians have in these places? And is it only, as you say in your presentation, only an opportunity to accumulate income at various levels of the urban administration? And I wanted to know if it's also used in, or not used, but if it's also profited in a political way. Does this this negotiation and allocation of urban space have something to do with electoral politics and and politics in a broader sense?
Thank you so much, Andy, for your questions. Really, it's right on point. My own research. Yes, to answer to your last question. Yes, it's yeah, they mobilized like that negotiation to allowing, let's say, economic actors to access some spaces. It can become, or it is a process that is quite often politicized, like city officials, they use it even for electoral purposes. Like one of example, actually in the presentation does not appear, but in my paper it appears, is that the central market was destroyed like 1.5 years, it was destroyed. But because the vendors were contesting, they wanted to still have access to a space where they could sell their good and product. But then the city official, like the mayor of Kinshasa, somehow he could not refuse, like, to allow them to access some streets near the central market, because he was afraid that would appear politically, that would not appear wise, like it would undermine his legitimacy as the city, as the mayor, but also at the same time it would even undermine the president. So that is one way where, like that negotiation, it tends to go, it becomes very much politicized by political actors. As regarding your question regarding the middle, there are a lot of people in the middle, a lot of intermediaries, and that's what even why I was asking about the different forms of governance, because like in the DRC and in Kinshasa also in particular, where we have that thing of what we call like the real governance. There is one institutional form of governance, but there are different levels where the governance, because quite often the formal, if I would allow myself to use that term, the formal governance sometimes is not able to operate correctly. Then there are fragmentation in the forms of governance where, for example, one example could be like we have tax collectors who are collecting informal taxes on the street. They are collecting taxes from people who are not registered, who normally they are considered to be informal. But the money that is being collected is going to the upper, like to the upper layer of the administrations, where even the mayor knows that they are still collecting, like there are tax collectors who are collecting taxes from informal vendors who are officially not registered. And then these are taxes that are not really fixed, like the amount of money that they're even collecting, it depends on the day and it depends on the people that they would see on the street. So all of these processes of negotiation, it quite happen like in different levels, even different forms of governments, that like in the case of Kinshasa, it will be very difficult to unify like one form of governance, because we have one form of governance that is the bureaucratic, but there are different layers of governance that will involve the negotiation process between the states and the social actors.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hiratir. I just have, are there any other questions actually? Before I have a question of my own, but if there's anyone else who might want to jump in. If there are no questions, additional questions, I would like to ask you a little bit more about this kind of description of space as a social resource, which I found quite interesting. And I was wondering if you could maybe give us your reflection on how this idea of space as a social resource, what does it tell us about kind of the urban politics of Kinshasa? Particularly, you've kind of alluded to kind of practices of extraction and informal tax collection. I'm just wondering about this idea of kind of the negotiated space, or of the art of coping that you kind of described in your presentation. What does this maybe tell us about the broader kind of state structures at play within the city? It's kind of a broad question, but just be interesting to hear your reflections on that in a bit more detail.
Thank you very much for this incredible question as well. And yes, the idea of space as a kind of social resource, like I'm drawing it from even starting from the ethnographic data that I've been collecting in Kinshasa, which first it stems from the idea that for economic actors, especially for economic actors in this specific case, accessing a space like a strategic space is very important. It's as important as having economic capital. Like, because in the case of the market, after the central market was destroyed, vendors who were selling the central market, they had a hard time finding strategic place elsewhere. Not because there are no other places, because there were many other places in the cities, but the places where they used to sell the products were really well known all over the city. So they were able to attract more customers when they were in one strategic space. So now that they do not have access to that strategic space anymore, then like in terms of the mobility, the economic mobility, in terms of the outcome of the economic activities, there is a big decrease in the outcome of the economic activities. So drawing from that, then I try to say, like, then the space, like this physical space, the economic space, become as important as the economic capital or as the social capital. But that resource, that kind of social resource, it's something that it's distributed first by the state, because yes, the state that has the official, that is entitled to give access to a space. But because the states, even more than the state of the state is fragmented into different forms of governance, then that access the space in the case of Kinshasa becomes negotiated. So it's, I'm just summarizing again what I was presenting. So maybe to wrap up, to specifically to your question, what it tells us about the forms of the state in Kinshasa, I would say, yeah, in my case, or in this case, it appears to show a negotiated state, that the state becomes very much negotiated. And it's, I would not normatively call it formal or informal, but something that is very much negotiated, trying as much as possible to draw from resources, but also to make profit, to extract from the people, but also to sustain for the own sustainability of the states in that sense.
That's a really interesting kind of point at the end, regarding kind of like the everyday kind of practices of state making or state building, you could say, and how the kind of the formal boundaries of that are a lot fuzzier when you kind of look at that practices on the ground. And yeah, I found a really interesting discussion about that in your presentation. Thank you. We've run out of time, unfortunately. So I'm kind of aware we probably have to draw this to a close because we have our final session in about 10 minutes. But please, yeah, please join us for that last session. Grab a coffee. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of kind of overlapping kind of themes that we can probably draw out in that final session as well. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wabi. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.